Hello and welcome to the latest webcast from the Register, here with my illustrious panel, who I'll introduce you in a minute. But first, let's think about the topic of the day, which is the word hybrid. Now, anyone who's worked in IT for more than about 10 minutes knows that it has a fantastic propensity to pick on a word, start using it, and then assume that everyone knows exactly what that word means until kingdom come. And most of us are left scratching our heads thinking, well, I suppose it might mean that. And we kind of go with what we think it means rather than actually what it means, even if it means anything at all. And that's where I'll leave the philosophizing, because the word hybrid is obviously addling my brain, and I don't want it to addle yours. So we're here to talk about hybrid, specifically hybrid cloud, and I know we're going to get onto the subject of hybrid infrastructure versus hybrid cloud, hybrid this, hybrid that, etc., etc. Most importantly, because clearly I don't know what I'm talking about, is that I introduce the panel and they can tell us what they think the word hybrid means and where they've come from in their background. So maybe, Marcus, we can start with yourself from HPE. Marcus is Business Development Manager from HPE, who knows all about hybrid, don't you, Marcus?
I certainly hope I do.
Yeah.
So thanks for the introduction, John, and the opportunity to join you on this event. So Marcus Thompson, I work in our storage business in a development role, very much focused around what we call software-defined storage and our hyper-converged platforms, one of which is a private cloud platform closely integrated with Microsoft. I've been in the storage business for 27 years, and actually it's quite interesting now that we're not so much talking about storage and servers, but actually platforms and solutions.
You notice he threw in another word there, which was hyper-converged, which we may have to add a bit of explication to as well.
Yeah, we did that a year ago, so hopefully the audience, if they saw us back in June, is familiar with that. So, but we can certainly touch upon yet again.
Any questions? Ask your questions, and we will endeavour to answer them. And Vivek from Microsoft, Enterprise Architect, I do believe.
Yes,
What's your view on hybrid?
Well, yeah, Vivek, Warrior, Enterprise Architect with Microsoft Services. I've been working in the industry for about 25 years now, 12 years with Microsoft, and of which the last 7 years I've been working on something cloud or the other. And I think I've seen the evolution of this terminology of hybrid coming to prominence in the last few years more than ever before, because I think we are realizing that it needs to work in integration with what you're doing in the public cloud, with the private cloud and so on, which I'm sure we'll be talking about. But yes, I've seen that evolution of the term, and yeah, I look forward to a good discussion today.
Okay, and the ever illustrious Tony Locke from Freeform Dynamics, who has also potentially got the ability to say that you've seen it all before.
Absolutely,
Tony.
John. Yeah. As you know, we talk to the Register audience all the time, and certainly the feedback we get from them is that hybrid is absolutely one of the overused terms, used in many different contexts, as you said. Basically, almost equates to confusion, a bit like heterogeneous.
Oh, well,
so
yes.
There's another word for you. Just to add to
so heterogeneous hyperconvergence of hybrid cloud is what we're here to discuss today.
It's all the H's.
All the H's. And on that note, Tony, you mentioned the research. Maybe you could run us through some of the information that the Reg audience have been telling us in this hybrid cloud area.
We've just got a sort of brief kick-off slide here, and it's where's the Reg audience planning on spending its money this year? And as you can see, core IT infrastructure, absolutely up there. Nearly everybody's got money to spend on this to some degree or another. But going all the way down through cloud and hosted systems, when we ask similar questions, even 3, 4, 5 years ago, the percentage is saying, yep, we've actually got budget items for this, as opposed to we're spending money on it, maybe in an unplanned fashion, was much lower. That's gone up a lot. So there's clearly a lot going on internally and externally.
And the dark blues, the very much yeses, isn't it? If anyone can't read the slides out there.
The stuff on the left-hand side of the charts, they're the yeses. On the right-hand side, it's the unsure or not applicable to us.
That's a lot of not surety.
Well, that's it again. Not everybody who takes part in the surveys actually knows what the budget is for the organisation, so that accounts for quite a fair number of that. But clearly, money is being spent in all of these areas.
Marcus, does this reflect what you're seeing out there as because you're trying to sell this stuff, aren't you?
Yeah, I mean, obviously. Infrastructure systems are at the core of our business, and when I go and talk to customers that are in a position or looking to make new investments, what I would say is that they are actually looking beyond just I need to replace my servers, my storage, my networking. They're starting to actually look at, areas of potential transformation. Examples with a customer last week, financial services organisation, and their core business application today was a hosted system. They were challenged with 3-year service agreements, and they were actually saying, maybe I can actually bring this system back in-house if I can simplify my infrastructure, or do I actually look at moving it to a cloud environment where actually I don't have to commit to a 3-year contract, I can actually buy the service by the minute. So I think, to a certain extent there's an element of business as usual, but also people reflecting on different ways forward as well.
That's really interesting. I believe that's really interesting, because what it's actually saying is that people are wanting choices. They're not saying we want to go all the way over there to full, what people originally called cloud, everything out there as a service. They want to keep some stuff in-house. They manage themselves maybe in a cloud environment. They want to use some stuff out there, maybe in a cloud environment. They want everything but ultimately it boils down to they want the choice for each specific situation.
I think it's an element of choice and then determining the best approach for a particular area of the business. I think we talk about hybrid, and as you said, it has become the latest buzzword, and everything's about hybrid IT. I think my customers have been hybrid for years, particularly in the software as a service area, whether it's solutions like CRM from Salesforce, HR solutions from people like Workday. Office 365 is probably the fastest growing area of software as a service, I would say. Yet, traditional IT for core business applications, largely remains traditional, I would say.
I mean, maybe the choice has got a plus and a minus for Vivek. I'm looking at you when I'm saying this, because the downside of choice is that you can end up with a hodgepodge and say, yes, but we made a choice. It's a bit like agility. Agility is a kind of actual another way of saying chaos. Are we seeing similar kind of results in the cloud scenario?
Yeah, I think if you look at different audiences, if you look at the medium and large scale enterprises who have been adopting cloud for many years now, especially in services like email, collaboration, communication, and so on. For them, this is not a new concept. They have already done that. Many of them are already pretty much well established in terms of using the cloud for those kinds of services. The choice element becomes a complex thing to talk about, because when it comes to infrastructure-based services and what are the kind of things that you can do in the public cloud versus what you can do in the private cloud, I think that is where the discussion gets very interesting in terms of hybrid, in terms of choice available and the options that are the best suited.
And Tony, here on the chart we said we've got planned, we've got integrated, but we've also got the accidental consequence of
we've got the accidental is probably far more prevalent than the integrated at the moment, but that's a different issue. The other thing about choice is it actually provides a degree of flexibility, which, as you said, is a bit of a double-edged sword. If we've got too much choice, we don't know what to pick. But having flexibility and trying to move things into different areas, that's really always been something that the register audience have told us is highly desirable, that we want to be able to move things as appropriate, which is why, on the previous chart, there was 20% of the organisations that are saying that actually automation and management and monitoring tools were on their planned budget for this year, which is something of a change compared to the past. But the ability to actually move between these different offerings easily, that's really at the heart of everything. Can you do that? Is it possible?
I mean, that suggests that I'm just remembering a phrase which I'll get out of my system. People used to talk about the journey to the cloud. I don't know if people still do talk about the journey to the cloud, but this is also about the journey from the cloud. And I wonder if, therefore, it's about the ability to change. As you say, it's not about making a static choice. It's more about being able to dynamically, if we did it this way, now we want to do it that way. We want to go back to this way again.
I think, as you say, it's more about getting a journey, and we might start off with a particular destination in mind, but the routing that we use to get there will change, and indeed by the time we get to where we were planning to move in the first place, then probably we find we need to get somewhere else anyway. So it is about a journey. It's not really getting to a destination.
It might be worthwhile to mention, John, that many companies are just starting on this whole transformation from the traditional kind of infrastructure world to what is the cloud. So that in itself is a big step forward in terms of transforming your data centers into being more cloud-like and so on. And many companies in our experience are doing that. A good example would be, even if I look at one of the large federal government service providers in the US, they have a very traditional environment, and because of the nature of their operations, they have to rely on very legacy systems for many, many years. But they're also looking at cloud as a potential way of doing things. And they are now starting to experiment, and they're only at the experimentation stage now, and looking at moving small chunks of that infrastructure into a cloud-like world. And that, although because of the size of their operations, even those experiments are pretty large in scope, but it's interesting to note that even those journeys, a lot of companies are making the journey only now.
I think there's elements of, firstly, I guess the question might be, what, when we talk about private cloud, what it actually is a private cloud. I think a lot of people refer to their virtualized infrastructure environment as their cloud. My observation is that there are elements of private cloud that have real business benefit that might, for instance, infrastructure as a service, the ability for someone to actually come and get the infrastructure that they want in an automated fashion rather than having to ask IT for it is one element of private cloud. Is it on a chargeback system? Is it an elastic environment? There's lots of things you might have as a tick list to say, I really have a private cloud environment that operates in a similar way to a public cloud. But I'm seeing elements of adoption of platforms that we've positioned as a private cloud because the customer wants to improve a particular area, and the ability to pre-provision a bunch of virtual machines, as an example, is a real business benefit, and it's an attribute of private cloud, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're operating their infrastructure in a complete mode.
And that comes across when we talk to the register audience all the time, that the characteristics of a private cloud are absolutely seen as being very desirable. There's almost no argument with that. The last time we asked, it was 85-90% of the register audience said, yeah, those are the sorts of things that we want to be able to do. Can we actually get there at the moment and do that? Maybe not. Partly because of technology, but also to do with things that we've talked about in the past, to do with budgeting. So, to have this, infrastructure that someone can just call down and use on demand still means you've got to have the infrastructure there in the first place, guys. How do you get that? Is it done on some sort of shared infrastructure budget? Many organizations still don't have a shared infrastructure type budget mechanism in place in how they finance IT. So there are lots of issues wrapped around this that are still, being worked through.
Absolutely agree with you.
The implication to me is that the journey is in fact a journey to maturity. It's not a journey to one type of architecture or another type of architecture. It's more about a journey to being able to do things dynamically, to be able to build on experiments.
Yes, indeed. And I think it's also important to highlight that journey is different for different companies. I think it's very difficult to overgeneralize this as a trend for everyone in the industry. So if you look at some of the very large companies, they're making great strides in their kind of developments and evolution of the cloud. There are many others who have not even made the first move. So I think there's a big deal of variety, even within industry segments, in terms of how they're making the journey.
And I think to that point, if we look at the next chart, it's very much showing that if anyone's worried out there that they're kind of being left behind on the journey to the cloud, on the journey to better IT, etc., these are still early doors, aren't they, Tony?
And I would say it's not a journey to the cloud. It's a journey to lots of different clouds, and I would even say that it's not a journey to somewhere again, because I don't think this journey is going to end. We're just going to have different waypoints along the way, and when we reach something that today we would consider as being the end point of today's journey to the cloud, there'll be something further to push us on anyway. But the Register audience have told us here exactly as you said that we're actually trying lots of different things. So it's not just one cloud vendor that's dominating the marketplace. We're trying lots. We're using lots of different things out there. The one element that's been mentioned earlier that really has got quite a high proportion of Register users making light of the service already is Office 365. That has grown very dramatically, and you can see here it's nearly 1 in 4 using it extensively already. And that's within just a couple of years, so it's grown very quickly. But all of the other infrastructure as a service, people are trying them through a whole range of other stuff as well, including hosting, remote managed services, the lot. Everything's in play.
So is that happy days for you guys, Vivek?
Like I said, I started working on Office 365 about 7 years back at its early inception. So that service for us internally in Microsoft looks like a lot of people are adopting that, and it's almost become standard way of doing that. And couple that with what we're doing in the infrastructure space, I think that's when it gets more interesting, when you combine the things that you already experienced in the software as a service world and try and take advantage of that by combining that with the infrastructure as a service world and platform as a service world. I'm throwing some terminologies here, I'm sure we'll discuss that, but I think that's where it gets more and more interesting and also valuable for
Is that a
enterprise to look at.
hyper-converged heterogeneous infrastructure as a service platform world? So.
Yeah.
The other thing the chart shows is that we've got a fair number of people saying here that we're making no use of this. But if you look, there's also a large proportion saying we're not sure, because it's really difficult to actually get a handle on how much of this external resource we are using. And
is that a shadow IT question as well?
It's not just a shadow IT question. It's just because quite often it's IT that's doing the shadow IT as well. So it's not one thing or another, but it's really hard to keep track of.
Yeah, don't watch my mouth, watch the feet. It's one of those.
Don't do as I do as I tell you.
Absolutely. I want to turn to you, Marcus, because a lot of the time that people do adopt technology or change their attitudes or change their approaches, it's because of some hard reason why. And you, in the position that you're in at the front end of the client relationship, you must experience why people are coming to you and saying, this is what we're trying to do, and therefore, what kinds of things are you seeing out there? What conversations are you having?
So I think the observation I've been reflecting on in maybe the last sort of 12, 18 months is the fact that businesses really do want to drive themselves with IT. So they are exploring avenues, the mantra I used to see all the time was about efficiency and cost. I think now, the word that I hear used more and more by customers is agility. Everything, we want things to happen now, we want things to happen quicker. How can we do that? Whole new industries coming to market as well. In London now we're actually the epicenter of investment in fintech. 3-4 years ago, we probably didn't even really know what that was. So there's whole new, business services.
Post Brexit, I'm not sure we were like that, but there you go.
Coming to market, and many of those application areas, are born in the cloud. That they will never, reside in a traditional data center. But then we see customers that are actually looking to, we started doing this in a public cloud. We now want to bring it back in house because we actually think we can manage the economics better in-house. They may be right, they may be wrong. So just see it as a fluid world, but one driven more by agility than necessarily cost.
And therefore, doesn't that make it quite hard for you to have the customer relationship? Because when it was a kind of big old project thing, you were just kind of saying how many servers do you want, how many storage boxes do you want, etc., etc. Whereas this is more about what kind of flexibility can you offer? Are you having different negotiations?
My conversations have just got more interesting because it's not just about the widget and the terabytes and the IOPS anymore. And I think the solutions as an organisation we have to provide are very different as well. So, as part of our strategy, we recognise the world is a hybrid world, which means that people will consume IT services in multiple different ways. We recognise that the role of IT, we think, has to be the broker of that. Someone's got to be in charge and control of it. And that means you need people, you need process, and ultimately you need automation and management tools to coordinate, where these different workloads are running and where they would run best. Our solutions have become more around software and automation as much as they have about hardware and infrastructure.
Similar story, Vivek?
Yeah, I think I certainly agree with Marcus about the conversation getting more interesting, because if I look at one example of a bank, a UK-based bank that's trying out some new approaches to utilizing the cloud. As you can understand, financial services industry are pretty touchy about this concept of cloud and compliance and regulation and so on. But what they're trying to do is they're looking at experimenting with tablet-based devices in remote branches. But if you are doing work in a remote branch, you can't have infrastructure in every branch in the remote area. So how do you then make use of the internet to connect to the cloud, but bring all the data back to secure locations so that there is security and manageability of everything that you're doing? And that bank is now trying out new customer experiences using tablet devices in the remote branches. And that's an interesting way of companies trying to figure out what's right for them in exploiting the cloud.
There is no one size fits all.
No.
Ultimately, which picking up on a few points that we've been making, that given that there is no one size fits all, I'll throw that back at you. Given that people are looking to agility as the first option, given that the journey goes both ways, one day they may want everything out there, next day everything in here. The stumbling block, perhaps, you mentioned it before, Tony, it was automation. Is how can you do that without making it a very human-centric challenge?
It's getting the automation right, also getting the integration between various tools right, because quite often, there's this idea that using public cloud services is really quick and easy, which it can be, but usually, 9 times out of 10, if not more, they need to get back to get some data that exists inside the organization. So you've got an archetypal case of need to integrate here. So even if there is some shadow IT going on, the likelihood is they're going to come and knock on IT's door to say, we need something, can you help us? So it's trying to make all of these integration points as smooth as possible, but also being aware of what's going on, getting the whole communication behind some of the projects that might kick off stuff here. Branch office and geographic specific type initiatives, they're pretty clear and usually quite high visibility inside the organisation because they're difficult to do. They take a long time to plan. But when you start moving down into things like harnessing individual cloud capabilities for specific scenarios, that's where sometimes the planning might be more short term, more rushed, and perhaps IT gets less of a lead time to be part of that game. So that comes across in the projects that you guys are seeing.
I agree. I think the individual scenarios, again, depends from company to company. We have companies who are just sticking to one type of computing model in one geography, trying out new things, appliance-based approaches, or converged appliances in other geographies, because it's very easy and quicker to set those things up and try new things. And if you so decide that you don't want to continue with that, the cost that you have actually incurred is not very high in this new world. So I think it's also worthwhile mentioning that these new technologies make it easier for you to experiment different things and find out what's really right for you as an organization, because that might be very different from what other organizations are doing.
And I think, obviously there are a broad, massive spectrum of IT users in terms of size of customer and type of business. So, what appears like a relevant strategy and conversation for a global enterprise customer is clearly very different for a London estate agency employing 25 people. And I think, that's where it's interesting with this conversation, when a lot of the things comes down to it depends. We see the same platform could be used by a large enterprise very differently from a small business, but it actually has a relevance to both of them for different reasons. I was working with a client the other day, a London-based consulting firm, a couple of hundred users, all Microsoft applications, all discreetly deployed, looking at some form of consolidation, virtualization, availability, disaster recovery, and he picked on this particular platform that we're talking about today because he could see a way of eliminating a disaster recovery location that when he stood up, and actually moving that workload to the cloud and take advantage of the fact that data can be replicated there, and he can effectively create the recovery service when he needs it, rather than paying for a recovery service that he may never use. Exactly the same platform is being looked at by a global organisation that has many remote offices in difficult locations. They need turnkey solutions to be deployed there. The CIO has put a mantra out that his IT people need to be adding more value to the business, and I'm going to take away your pain of designing and managing infrastructure by simplifying it, and go away and think what you're going to do with the time to deliver more value to the business. So they're almost using the private cloud as a mechanism of encouraging their organisation to change as well and think differently. Which
I've got an answer for all of that. Coming from a software background, as I do, my answer is that we can sort it out. We don't need to worry about infrastructure. Here's the news, guys. We don't need to worry about infrastructure anymore, because software is going to sort it all out, and it's all going to be software defined and managed and autonomic. Isn't it, Tony?
Except the software's got to run on some infrastructure, John. Remember that. It's pretty important.
But it's not exactly what we're seeing out there, is it?
But it's interesting. The whole software-defined thing is certainly growing. But just to touch on one thing that Marcus mentioned there, and that was disaster recovery, which lots of large enterprises sort of take for granted. But traditionally, it's been taken for granted for maybe a small number of really important business applications, where something significant in terms of DR, rapid DR recovery capabilities have been put in place. Now, with using things like cloud or just appliances that you can replicate, maybe hosted by a channel partner or running in a genuine public cloud, are bringing disaster recovery to a much broader range of applications. But also importantly, it's actually bringing it down to much smaller customers that in the past, disaster recovery consisted of backup tapes, and then trying to buy some equipment to actually reload the tapes onto, which is not the easiest of tasks.
In the basement of the same building.
If you've ever been under pressure to try and reinstall something from backup tapes, after just trying to rush out to find the infrastructure in the first place to run it on, it's really important. And that's all software defined in one way or another. But what we can find, from the register audience here, is that there's quite a degree of a wide spectrum of understandings and acceptance of the very term, software defined. Is it pure buzzword hype marketing? Maybe. And there's obviously, one in 10 people who took part in this particular survey say, we're actually really proactively moving towards a much more flexible software managed type scenario. And everybody, as I said earlier, tells us that those sort of capabilities they absolutely do think are really good. Whether they're available to do now, that's where it gets a bit more interesting. You can see that a quarter say it's happening, but it's not really being planned by us. It's just happening because the vendors and the suppliers are actually giving this functionality to us, implanting it inside the systems we're running. But then you've got a slightly bigger number saying, well, no, we're not seeing anything like that at the moment. And then there's the biggest number of all, we're not quite sure. So there's still the term, I think, is being used by everybody. It really is a hype term. I can't remember the last time I had a briefing with a vendor of anything, including people that just make nuts and bolts. They've got nothing to do with IT, but even they were software defined.
Software defined nuts and bolts.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. So it's certainly the hype buzzword, even more so than hybrid at the moment.
I'm going to give you
the
guys...
characteristics are something that people really want. It's can we actually do it? That's the thing.
Well, in answer to that question, I think it's a good opportunity. We've got to go out on a limb a little bit on these webinars, as you know, and make that rash assumption that the vendors that we invite and that sponsor very kindly these webinars do actually want to solve people's problems, which I think for you out there, it's kind of true 98% of the time. So what we're trying to do is just isolate the 2% and chuck it away as quickly as possible. But With that in mind, Vivek, from your enterprise architect perspective, Microsoft's been looking a lot at this, and it thinks it's come up with the way to address some of these issues. So I'm going to turn to you, and there's a complicated picture that's appeared on everyone's screens now.
Yes.
And maybe you can help us understand what the heck's going on in that.
Okay, so as a segue into this conversation, let me just quickly mention about this hype about software defined. If you really look at the core of everything that we do in the cloud, it's actually software defined that makes it happen. It's because we have software defined that we are able to create isolated networks for different customers. We are able to have multi-tenancy and all those good things that the cloud offers. So yes, it is hyped about quite a lot, but at the core of everything that we do in the cloud, that's what really powers everything.
So at the core of what you just said, you actually turned software defined into a noun, which was canny. I noticed you doing that.
That is an achievement. Okay. Right, so what we do in Microsoft around the cloud platform, which is really our Azure platform, is around two areas. One is infrastructure as a service, and the other one is a platform as a service. So the idea there is that we have many organizations who have been running data centers in the traditional mode for many, many years. We talked about how they are now planning to move to the cloud world in the private data center so that they get all the advantages of multi-tenancy, looking at different departments as though they are different customers within the same company, monitoring their usage of resources and all those good things. But how do we let those same companies exploit the great advances we are making in the public cloud? So for example, we have things like Internet of Things. We have things like machine learning or analytics and so on. So all these are enabled at the public cloud level. How do we let those organizations exploit those public cloud capabilities without compromising any of their assets that they have in the private cloud? And that's where this whole terminology of hybrid becomes very important. If you can manage hybrid in a very efficient way.
And let's be clear, just to, this is just my ignorance showing through here, but essentially they could do it all on the private cloud, but they'd have to build a whopper in order to. So the point of the public cloud is it's far bigger than anything they could build themselves.
Indeed, a lot of these capabilities are enabled because it's built for hyperscale, which means you have huge amounts of capacity in terms of computing, storage, networking, and so on in the public cloud at very cheap cost, at very cheap levels. And to achieve the same kind of cost levels, to get the same functionality in the private cloud stage is going to be very, very difficult for enterprises to do. So you need to try and find a way of enabling those enterprises to exploit those public cloud capabilities, but also address their concerns around security, management, operations, and so on. And that's where we are seeing this trend towards hybrid cloud, and that's really what's making a lot of sense to enterprises.
Mm-hmm. Similar picture from you, Marcus, in terms of getting that balance?
So, we recognise it's a hybrid world. As a business, we made a decision to partner with public cloud suppliers as opposed to become one, and how that's changing. Our approach is that we want to be able to deliver solutions that give our customers a consistent look and feel and approach to what they run on premise to what is available in the public cloud, and on top of that provide them with that software and automation to be able to manage it as a resource within their business.
I mean, presumably you don't, ultimately if you're selling processing and storage, you don't care who buys it off you or what's being run on it. You just you will put it wherever's useful.
Absolutely, and we've got to be pragmatic about that. And as I said, we are a major supplier to public cloud providers of infrastructure, and obviously we continue to supply our solutions in a traditional on-prem data center approach as well. But then on top of that, provide the software tools for our customers to manage all of their infrastructure, public, private and traditional, in a consistent way. Indeed. So we see IT needs to be and remain the broker of services to their business wherever they reside, and so that's actually an incremental opportunity for us to engage with our customers. So I don't see public cloud as a threat to our business in any way. I see that it's a complementary activity, and ultimately it will just drive businesses to consume more IT services because that's around the automation and efficiency that they're looking for.
Tony, you're the voice of reason in the room. Are these guys telling a good story, or?
It's a story that's pretty much in line with what people are looking for. It's back to that whole question of flexibility again. You know, there'll be some things that we're happy to keep inside. There'll be other things that we're happy to push outside. And outside might be to the big public cloud providers, you know, like Azure. It might also be to something more local, maybe a national provider, or possibly even someone very local that's running their own, you know, a sort of managed private cloud that they might have just a small number of people on. Even vertical clouds, we've talked to organizations about, where they serve a number of organizations in the same business line that have got the same characteristic requirements in terms of security, where it might be, you know, ramped up even further for, you know, some sort of regulatory purpose, or in terms of performance, quality, things like this, the additional resources, size of machines, whatever. It could be to do with just, you know, long-term backups and archiving, stuff like this. So there's a whole range of different options there. It's not, you know, the public cloud. There is no such thing as the public cloud. There are lots of different public clouds, and that's what people want. The flexibility to choose amongst the options available to them, work out, well, which ones does it make sense? What are the characteristics of those clouds? You know, some will be in terms of performance, the services they offer, the security, the cost, absolutely. And remember, you know, costing cloud is not always as easy as it might appear. You know, some clouds look to be really cheap to do one thing with, but when you try to bend it slightly in a different way, it becomes really expensive. So that's the whole thing about understanding what you're doing, working out what the options are for it, and then being able to execute that automatically. That's the bit that at the moment people are missing. We're still building private clouds, yes, and the public clouds are there. It's getting the integration between them all so that we can manage it effectively without really having to do a lot of manual work to keep the costs down, but also to keep the risks down, because you know all of the reg readers out there know that the biggest cause of service interruption is usually when we do something, you know, and when we do it manually. So that's the thing, particularly if we're doing it, you know, in a rush, under pressure, in an emergency scenario. So keeping things automatic, flexible, really important.
Well, you'll be interested to know, and we haven't rehearsed this, but not in this way. But essentially, both of our vendor sponsors here have brought something to show us that think that goes to solve what Tony's expressing as the challenge here. So, and you'll be unsurprised to hear that. Given the fact we've got an architect and a sales guy in the room, we've got an architecture and something that the sales guy would very much like you to have a look at. So so we're going to start with you, Vivek, just because that's the order that the slides are in, and have a look at the architecture first. So a lot of these things that, yeah, joking apart, a lot of these things that we're saying about getting that flexibility, getting the balance right, helping people wherever they want to put their stuff, to you, you're an architect, you think it comes down to getting the right boxes on the PowerPoint slide?
Yes, well, I think the background to that is that what Tony mentioned, I think, is that why are we doing all this? Why is an enterprise even looking at these kind of options? It's because they're trying to respond to a genuine need coming from the business. They're being asked to respond very quickly to things where, let's say 2 years back, you could spend weeks to get up some kind of resources made available to a business. So this whole idea of this architectural approach to the cloud is really based on the simple fact that you need to try and bring agility to the private cloud platform in a way that people don't spend too much time doing DIY on private cloud. You can. All the elements of the architecture that we have on this picture, for example, can be downloaded, can be purchased, can be put together by architects and engineers, and you can make a private cloud work. But the question is, do you want to spend time doing that, or are you in a situation where you just want to get a box, open it, run it, and then get on with all the other things that you want to do on the cloud, things like running, let's say, business analytics or some kind of innovative application or workload on that. So that's where the cloud platform system kind of reference architecture comes in. So this was really derived for creating private clouds in an appliance-like approach. So using all the great things about converged infrastructure, for example, which I'm sure Marcus will explain much better than I can, and making all that available to an organization in a compact, out-of-the-box manner that combines our products from the server stack, so things like Windows Server, System Center, and something called Windows Azure Pack, which I won't bore you about, but they're all essential elements of creating a private cloud from Microsoft platform perspective. But the real benefit of that is that it lends itself to appliances. So you can now have an appliance model taken out of the box, power to live in 3 hours. So that is technically what we are aiming for from this reference architecture. There's also a lot of automation built in, so you don't have to go and poke around to get things done. That's already pre-configured. And the great thing about this is that the two companies have worked together at an engineering level to make sure that all the kind of different configurations and best practices and so on are pre-built, certified and validated much before it lands up in the customer location. So a lot of the rigor and the work's been taken away from the customer side by doing this. So it lends itself to getting up and running on a private cloud very quickly and getting on with
So it's giving cloud that out-of-the-box experience. You're not having to kind of think which bit goes with which bit, and then integration, and then management, and I hadn't thought about that, and
That's correct.
Where's the data, and all those questions.
Correct.
And Marcus, if I turn to you, let's see what you've brought to the class today. If I may, I'm so sorry, I shouldn't do this. But essentially, you're saying that all of this you can just have a pallet turn up and it's got everything already built in.
Absolutely. So our interpretation of the CPS standard reference architecture is based upon our hyper-converged architecture. So we're talking about a platform that is x86 server based, virtualized, and all of the storage services are software defined within the product. I managed to get that in. So it enables a turnkey platform to be built in a very small integrated footprint with all of the storage services you'd expect from an enterprise class product, with added automation features, so the deployment of the system is done by software, not by people, which actually takes the risk out of the solution. And it's all about time to value, and actually getting on and using the system. So in many ways, a lot of the characteristics of a hyper-converged platform, simple to use, integrated, service-like, actually quite aligned to that concept of my first private cloud, if you like. And I think we're seeing a lot of organizations look at it in that way. It could simply be a virtualized compute platform powered by Microsoft Hyper-V with some extra management features, but it allows the customer to actually start creating those private cloud roles.
I was going to say, a few years ago we might have called this the data center in a box.
Yeah.
But now it's actually a cloud-enabled data center in a box.
Exactly.
Is that fair?
Similar, but let me give you an example of where it differs, and I think it comes back to, do I have a private cloud? So if I have a traditional converged infrastructure, I'm the administrator of the system, I need to orchestrate those services, and my colleague who might be a SQL DBA comes to me and say, please Marcus, can I have another virtual machine? And my answer is, not right now, I've got a meeting to go to, then it's my wife's birthday, I'll provision it tomorrow morning.
Bank holiday weekend.
Exactly, that's
not a good time to get a VM.
How about next Tuesday? What changes with this system is that we can now create two roles. We can create the role of the administrator and we can create the role of the tenant. And now my SQL DBA colleague becomes a tenant of the system, and actually I can start to pre-provision resources on the system that he can come and get as and when he likes it. And so that would be the principal difference I would see between a traditional infrastructure and that private cloud. I've now created two relationships. And from the customer that's looking towards Microsoft for public cloud services, the idea is that the tenant of that system comes to the HPE HC250 platform and sees exactly the same look and feel portal that they would get if they went to the public cloud. And so consistency of approach also, I think, has to be a business benefit.
Yep.
I was going to say, the most important part of this, I think, is actually that commonality of management between the two very different but essentially the same scenarios. In the past, one of the big issues we've had here is automation, and that automation isn't just about triggering and doing things. It really is more about automation of management. And the more you can make things the same and able to be, put into things that are simple, repeatable, that everybody understands and is used to. That's the bit that makes it really work, because then it doesn't matter to a degree whether it's running on the hyper-converged box or running in the public cloud on the Azure platform, or potentially running in a third-party cloud being run by a managed service provider for you as a hosted private cloud. It's got the same. You handle it in exactly the same way. If you want to, you automate it with your other management processes or even your scripting, to make it work and work in a common fashion so that you can eliminate those risks, or at least minimize the risks of people doing things and doing things differently.
I mean, it's interesting. I think that one of the things that I'm hearing is that the philosophy of cloud is being captured in the box. So it's not. One of the reasons people started flocking to using cloud-based services was the fact they could just do it and it would be really cheap to do it. And they didn't have to go through 6-week purchase order request cycles, and 6 weeks, that's an optimistic view of the whole deployment of new servers, etc. You could just run it, spin it up and use it, find it was rubbish, not what you wanted, spin it back down again, add more memory, spin it back up again, all that kind of stuff. All at very low cost. So that philosophy is what's being built in the box, as much as having the processor capabilities and all the
as long as you've been
stuff
through that 6-week, 6-month procurement process in the first place to get as many boxes as you need to provision the service. That's the bit that needs to change. You've got to do more forward planning on the IT budgeting side to actually build a shared infrastructure that's there ready to be used, and find some way of actually financing that differently to the way you paid for things in the past. You still need that infrastructure, John. The software doesn't run on its own unless you put it into the public cloud.
No, don't. I mean, it's an old adage. I'm sure we've all had that conversation where it was, but it's the cloud. It just exists.
Yeah.
I mean, that brings to the adoption challenges. I mean, the first thing, someone's got to buy this thing, right? You can't just say, well, we'll just pay for it if we use it a bit. Someone's got to come to you and actually procure one of these boxes.
So, I think we talked about it before, that my observation has been that there's already a requirement to invest for a particular reason, and this system is being looked at as a step along that journey. So, from a risk perspective, it's x86, it's Microsoft Server 2012 R2, it's Microsoft System Center, it's HPE Store Virtual Storage Services that have been in the market for 10, 12, 15 years. So the ingredients in there are very low risk. So what we're actually saying is, if you're looking to change the way you deliver infrastructure services in your business, this is a step in the right direction. Coming back to Tony's point, though, it's interesting what I've heard more and more now in conversations, and I think it's been triggered by public cloud, is the consumption model that customers want today. So before they would talk about needing to make a particular investment, so many servers, so many terabytes of storage. Now they're saying, give me a solution that runs 100 virtual machines and tell me how much you're going to charge me on a monthly basis for a system to run 100 virtual machines. And I'm talking about a system that's going to be maybe even a traditional infrastructure solution. So we've worked as hard on financial services models, on flexible capacity models, about pre-provisioning systems on site that customers don't actually pay for until they turn them on. So there are once again all these elements of being cloud-like that people are starting to want from their on-premise solutions, because they can see what it looks like in the public cloud, and I think they recognise the need for those changes.
Indeed, and I think also going back to your point about adoption challenges, I think these are all the different kinds of questions that companies tend to ask. I mean, they can be very different from different companies. But I think a good thing about this entire scenario now is that no matter what your questions are, and no matter what you think your adoption challenges are, those perceptions can be very quickly validated. So you can set up a proof of concept to test out whether security is going to be a challenge for you or whether identity is going to be a challenge for you, and then very quickly arrive at an assessment as to whether that's going to be a kind of stumbling block for your journey to set this hybrid model work. But I think it's safe to say that with the appliance model and with the converged infrastructure model that we have, it makes it easier for customers, once they have gone through that assessment of their adoption challenges and have tested out and validated those kind of questions and arrived at the right answers, taking that first step using this approach with an appliance probably is the most cost-effective way of doing it, in comparison to, let's say, spending a lot of time consulting hours and so on to build up a private cloud and then figure out that, oh no, we have a lot of questions that are still unanswered. So I think that's probably the right way to look at this.
It also plays very neatly into this challenge of, consumption type models are really attractive on one level, only pay for what you use, as long as you've actually projected how much you think you're going to use, and so you can get your budgets right in the first place. And the register audience know even better than we do that it's really difficult to do that. Quite often we haven't even got a good picture of quite how much we're consuming at the moment. We know how much we've got, maybe not, but we're not quite sure how well it's being used, how effectively it's being used, what spare capacity we have. So actually doing that modelling to move to a consumption-based element purely where you're paying somebody for it is really tricky. If you've got an appliance, on the other hand, then you've got that. It's a budget item. One way of paying for it is as a budget item in a traditional model. Fine. And then you can start testing all of these perceptions on, do we have the workloads that fit? How are they going to be used by my users? How do I throttle my users, much as I'd love to throttle my users, in terms of their consumption characteristics, if not in some other way, so that we can keep handle on that. Because one thing that we do know is that if you offer somebody the ability to feed themselves from an all they can eat buffet, they're likely to take far more than they actually eat, so you get a lot of waste. And the same happens with IT infrastructure as well. So how do you manage to keep that under control, deprovision stuff, etc.? But there's the whole bunch of security element challenges in there that you talked about, including identity management, which came across very clearly when we asked the register audience about this. You can see from the numbers here, do we have issues even today managing identity, across cloud services, multiple different cloud services? And you can see nearly 3 out of 4 say, yes, this is a serious issue for us. And when we say, well, okay, what about between cloud services and our internal systems? Same numbers roughly are in there.
So identity here, we're talking about the single sign-on kind of.
It's the nirvana that we've been after for the last 20 years.
It would be great when it works.
It's much more than that. In fact, if you look at the identity problem, many companies have evolved their identity infrastructure over many, many years, in certain cases decades. So, and nobody has really gone back into reassessing that or rebuilding that. It's just kind of grown along with the growth of the company with mergers and acquisitions and all those kind of things. So by the time the company is ready to kind of move to the cloud, they're looking at their identity infrastructure, which is a key criteria or key element of that journey, and saying, oh, this is a big mess. We have to deal with this first, which is true, before we can make any meaningful step to the cloud. So identity invariably becomes the first problem that you resolve before you make a significant.
And it's even more fundamental than that. We're not only talking about identity of people, users. We're essentially potentially talking about identity of data as well. Because we've got to control data wherever it moves. Can we move this to some public clouds or not? What about the geographical implications of it? So identity is going to spread far beyond just what's the ID that Tony Locke signs on with, and what are the characteristics and credentials that he needs to prove who he is. It's going to go way beyond that into data, and that keeps you into, well, how do you track data? In even your internal systems, never mind once you start pushing it around ever more broadly, so that you've got a good handle on where it is. Is it protected appropriately? Is it encrypted if it needs it? Is it backed up even? Because there's more than one example of people pushing things out to public clouds and then not being able to access the data. It's gone. Particularly if you were using a certain CRM system last week. So there are things still in there. The other thing is, do you want all of your data in a cloud service without a backup copy of it, internally? Personally, that would scare the hell out of me as an IT guy. So there's a whole lot wrapped around this, But that nirvana that we were talking about, the single sign-on, we asked the question about, federated, cloud-aware service and identity management. Yeah, do we use it already? Fewer than 1 in 4. And remember, this is a web survey, so the numbers actually saying, yeah, they're doing this are probably slightly higher than in the population as a whole, because they were in this to begin with. But yes, but not as much as we should. It's roughly the same numbers, but no, but we definitely should start doing this. People know it's a challenge, it's an issue that we've got to look at.
Mm-hmm.
So I think for IT people thinking that public cloud means that they become turkeys voting for Christmas, I think it's just not the case. I think if anybody has to be responsible for these matters, it's actually our customers' IT organisation. Mm-hmm. So I think they actually take on a new role of actually needing to put processes and software automation tools in place to do all of this, and I think it's interesting that this is the element that's clearly recognised, actually to a greater level than the adoption rates at the moment as well. So I think that's
so let me just be clear: is that working things through, even if you get your public and private stuff working together neatly, it's all integrated. Even if you get the automation of its management, everything's stable and you can provision stuff as easily as possible. Even if you get all of that working, you're still going to hit this barrier of identity, of just how to cope with user changes, of deprovisioning of services, what happens when someone leaves the organisation, what happens when someone changes role, all that stuff. To your point, Marcus, is
absolutely
going to stare you straight in the face.
Absolutely.
Particularly for companies that have been there for a very long time. For newer companies who just set up shop, let's say 5 years back, they are more likely to have more robust identity management systems than the way, let's say, companies 20 years old or 50 years old.
So we've got 3 minutes left. I just wanted to throw up a couple of bits of data from you guys, Tony, which is just about, so how is adoption happening, essentially? Where are people going to be buying into this stuff anyway? What's the deal?
As we saw from the early slides, people are buying into the ideas behind this, but there are some things that they are aware of as inhibiting them, that are challenges that they need to get over. Security and identity are absolutely in there, but it's not so much security of the cloud service per se, it's more generic than that, actually understanding what the data is, where it goes, how you put after it, how you monitor all of this stuff, how you keep a single management hold, a grip of this, so that you can do a lot of that management automation. You've got to have the awareness, but you can see right at the bottom here, there's still issues around funding, or rather inadequate funding, for actually how to look after all of this stuff. People know that there are elements that need to be looked at, so they can really push and exploit this.
So what's the advice to not think that all the problems are going to be solved out of the box? Is that?
My opinion here would be that start small, experiment, try everything out. If you have to fail very quickly so that those things don't work. If something succeeds, make sure that you have built-in capability to scale very quickly. So I think that approach is really what the cloud offers, or whether it be private, public, or hybrid. And so make the best use of that capability to actually set yourself on the right path.
Mm-hmm. And Marcus, anything to add to that?
I think, to Vivek's point, baby steps. Look at ways of being able to make investments that start to position you more as a service provider, to improve the efficiency and agility of your organisation by enabling people in a controlled fashion to be able to be more self-service. Look at ways of actually who owns budgets and who funds things over time, because I think the people and process thing can potentially hold back change. If the business wants a service from IT, then they need to pay for it. That also means that maybe they get the budget. But finally, set yourself out as the orchestrator and the broker of IT services back to the business.
You used the expression earlier of my first cloud in a box, didn't you? So yes. I think the opportunity is there to try this stuff out and then learn from actual genuine experience.
With no risk whatsoever. Effectively it's an agile virtualized infrastructure that enables you to become a service provider to your business.
Can you give it back afterwards, or is
no, we'd rather you kept it.
In the history of IT, I don't think anyone's ever given anything back, have they? So I think you're on safe ground there. Tony, what would be your last advice to?
My last advice would be basically, the third bullet point down. Start small, find something that's easy to do, and prove that it's success, because the idea of failing quickly is great and wonderful, but still many businesses are not great with the idea of failing, and people who fail can have short career lifetimes inside an organisation. It's changing slowly, and the more advanced organisations do get it, that we've got to try, we've got to be quick, and if we fail, but we carry on. IT in many organisations is not in that position, so find stuff that you can do, make sure you get the experience, and then you can exploit it, but put in solutions that you can expand and grow on, rather than just more silos being built.
Start small, learn, fail fast if you're going to get the experience, etc.
Absolutely.
So we've got some, thank you very much for your time today. We've got some final links. It's a bit of an eye chart, so if you have any questions, any further questions for anyone on the panel, if anything springs to mind when you're watching this, if you're watching it as on demand, then please let us know, and we'll endeavour to get back to you. And until next time, thank you very much, and we hope you now understand what the heterogeneous, hybrid, homogenised environment looks like. Cheers.
Thank you.
Right.